Well, Bryce, I appreciate you doing this. Uh, you go ahead and introduce yourself and give your rank and everything.
My name is Bryce Lockwood. I'm a retired Marine Corps gunnery sergeant, United States Marine Corps. Um, Probably the most interesting piece of my history goes back to the 6 Days War, 1967, Israel and her Arab neighbors, and probably should give some background behind that. 1960s, early 1960s, many of the sub-Saharan African countries had just won their independence from Belgium, Germany, Britain, France. And there was a heavy Soviet and Cuban influence in those sub Saharan African countries. They're very wealthy countries, wealthy in natural resources, gold, silver, rare minerals. And the Cubans in particular had a big influence there, as well as the Soviet Union. And the United States wanted to keep track about what was going on there politically and militarily. Cubans had a lot of troops there. Soviets had a lot of troops there. Um, Mind you, this is prior to the age of satellites, and the only way to find out what's going on with communications is to get up close. There were some World War II freighters that were in mothballs, and the Defense Department, particularly the United States Navy, began picking out the best of those hulls of those old freighters and reconfiguring them for electronics surveillance, electronics intelligence. There were primarily five: Jamestown, Georgetown, Liberty, Belmont. I forget all the rest of them right offhand. A couple of those were operated under contract by the CIA with civilian crews, but the five primary ones were manned by the United States Navy. The newest was the USS Liberty. She had been the World War II freighter. Um, those were Victory class hull. Victory class was the newest of those easily constructed freighters. She had been the SS Simmons Victory, World War II, commissioned in 1945, shipbuilding company in Seattle, Washington, I believe it was. They were putting those hulls out at the rate of one a day, far more than the Nazi wolf packs could sink. And we were literally overwhelming the Nazis in World War II with supplies that we were putting out with these easily constructed ships. Simmons Victory was put in mothballs, was taken back out of mothballs for the Korean conflict. She was an ammunition carrier, hauling ammunition to Korea, put back in mothballs after World War II, and her hull was probably the best shape of any of them that were in the mothball fleet. She was put in dry docks in 1965, reconfigured for electronics intelligence. We had aboard her the world's largest, most powerful mobile computer, a UNIVAC 500. Um, Today's electronics, you could probably do as much with your smartphone, but it was pretty high tech in 1965. Um, Her primary mission was cruising up and down the west coast of Africa, crammed full of electronics gear enough to monitor every known radio frequency. A huge linguistics staff aboard her: Portuguese linguists, French, Spanish, German linguists, and some Russian. In 1967, it appeared that war was imminent between Israel and her neighbors, the United Arab Republic. At that time, the United Arab Republic consisted of the countries of primarily Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and to a lesser extent, Libya. Israel had built up troops along the Egyptian border, and Egyptians had dug in defensive positions. Prior to the attack in 1967, early June of 1967, there was a group of U.S. F-4 Phantom photo reconnaissance aircraft that were sent by our Defense Department to Tyrone Air Base in Spain. All the markings were obliterated on those planes. The pilots were given neutral uniforms and neutral identification and flew photo reconnaissance missions over every country of the United Arab Republic. When hostilities broke out, the photographs from those planes were given to the Israeli government. They knew the location of every aircraft, every tank, every artillery emplacement, and all of her neighbors. As it looked like war was imminent, the USS Liberty was ordered off her cruise up and down the west coast of Africa and proceed on the 1st of June, 1967, with all due haste to Rota, Spain, where she was to take on stores and fuel, pick up some additional linguists, and proceed with all possible speed to the eastern Mediterranean to monitor what was going on. On May the 30th, I had been assigned temporary duty. My home base was in Bremerhaven, Germany. I'd been assigned temporary duty with VQ2, which was an airborne photo reconnaissance unit, home based in Rota, Spain. Middle of part of May, I'd been ordered there on 30 days temporary duty, pick up a EC-121 airborne TWA Constellation aircraft configured for intelligence collection. The group flew to Keflavik, Iceland, and there were 9 missions scheduled overflying the Russian North Sea Fleet summer exercises in the Norwegian Sea. We were late getting there. There were 3 of us Russian linguists that had been assigned to that mission. And the Navy driver they gave us to go to the airport, pick up our flight in Bremen, Germany, didn't know his way to the airport, and we missed our flight. We had to get rescheduled. It was a kind of a nice afternoon because there was an air show by the German military and French military there at Bremen, Germany, and we got to enjoy the air show. When we finally did get our flight, we flew into Seville, Spain, and it was in the middle of the night. And they had sent a Navy taxi there with a civilian driver to pick us up and take us to Rota, Spain. So here we are in Spain in the middle of the night with a taxi driver. When I was a teenager, one of my favorite classical pieces was Nights in the Gardens of Spain, piano and orchestra piece. It's beautiful music and a musical description of Gardens of Spain. And here we were in the middle of the night going through those gardens and that music going through my head. Out of those, we had missed the flight of the EC-121, One of the 3 Marines I'd sent there had a little romantic engagement with somebody that wasn't his wife, and the service had pulled his clearance, so he was a loss. And the other 2 of us, they took us to the uh, parachute loft, issued us flight suits, parachutes, gave us a quick briefing, put us on a EA-3 twin engine reconnaissance plane, and flew us to Keflavik, Iceland, where we picked up the EC-121. Out of those 9 missions that were scheduled, there were only 3 that were flown operational, and we had already missed 1. The bottom line of the Soviet North Sea Fleet summer exercises was that Soviets were running out of money, and they barely had enough money to keep their fleet fueled, much less maintained. We got a grand total of about 2 or 3 minutes of plain language Russian. I copied it, and it was so garbled you couldn't read it. So, out of those 9 missions, we returned to Rota, Spain. It was a Memorial Day weekend of 1967. There was a barbecue and kind of enjoying things. And I get done with the barbecue, and I'm heading back to the barracks, and those 2 buck sergeants that worked for me said, "Hey, Sarge, let's go into town and have some beers and pick up some women." So, well, no, you fellas go ahead, stay out of trouble. I was happily married and wasn't interested in messing around. "Oh, come on. No, just go ahead, stay out of trouble. Don't bother me." About 2 o'clock in the morning comes a bang, bang, bang on the door, and I figured it's those 2 young buck sergeants wanting to give the old Sarge a hard time. I said, "Get out of here, leave me alone." Bang, bang, bang on the door again. Now I'm angry. I jump up and jerk the door open, and it's a Navy messenger from the officer of the day. And he said, "Sergeant Lockwood?" "Yes." I said, "There's a message here from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You're to join the USS Liberty 0600 hours. Better get up and pack." So here I am down at the dock with my suitcase, what very few uniforms I had. We were ordered to travel in civilian clothes and flight suits. And here comes those 2 buck sergeants, and if you'd gone into town with us, you'd have been all right. No, they would have found me. There were 6 linguists scheduled to meet the USS Liberty, 3 Arabic civilians from National Security Agency, and 3 of us Marines. The other 2 were Sergeant Jack Raper, Corporal Ed Raymeyer. Both of them were Arabic linguists. The 3 civilians were all from National Security Agency. All 3 of them were former Navy linguists, all of them Arabic linguists. Alan Blue, Don Blaylock, and Mike Wilson, I believe, were all their names. The ship had a large dish antenna on the fantail. Mind you, this was early days of satellite communications. They were very unreliable. But the moon was reliable. It always was in the same position in relation to the Earth orbit. And we could bounce communications off the moon onto a huge dish antenna located in Cheltenham, Maryland. And they could receive streams of traffic from the ship. Well, there was a hydraulic system to keep that dish pointed at the moon. And the fittings were not very reliable. As the ship would roll with the sea, they'd squirt hydraulic fluid on the decks, and seawater and hydraulic fluid don't mix very well, kind of slippery. So the sailing, which was scheduled for early June 1st, was postponed until June the 2nd while submarine tender machinist crew there at Rhoda worked throughout the night machining new hydraulic fittings for the dish antenna, the Trashcom system. We sailed on June the 2nd. Hostilities broke out on June the 5th. Israel told the world that Egypt had attacked her. That was untrue. And we had messages aboard the Liberty actually had been intercepted by the Army intelligence, but we had received info copies of the messages that the Army had intercepted where Israel actually initiated hostilities. And many years later, they finally did admit that they had initiated the hostilities. There was an entire Egyptian brigade which had surrendered to the Israelis on June the 7th. Israel had planned on attacking the Golan Heights of southern Syria on June the 8th. That brigade of Egyptian troops required a lot of Israeli troops to keep them in check. Israel needed those troops. The Egyptian troops were literally starving, and one of the reasons that they had surrendered was so they could get fed and watered. On June the 8th, that entire Egyptian brigade was killed by the Israelis, buried in a mass grave. Many of them had their hands tied behind their backs with barbed wire. The morning of June the 8th, as we were sailing off the coast of Sinai, actually the night before on June the 7th, we were watching the Israelis bomb the Egyptians. We could see the explosions. On June the 8th, at roughly noon, we had a drill general quarters. I had been on the mid-watch the night before. I'd gotten off at 0600, 6 o'clock in the morning. I didn't have very much uniforms or clothing with me since there had been such a rush to get to that flight in Rota, Spain. So I went to the ship's small stores and bought some T-shirts and shorts. And we had this drill GQ at noon. The captain came on the 1MC, the public address system throughout the ship, and told us a few things that he wanted us to do to improve our reaction to general quarters. He wanted a faster response, especially in getting watertight doors sealed. We secured from general quarters, and I had purchased those T-shirts and shorts and was at my rack in the after part of the ship, stamping my name for the ship's laundry in those new T-shirts when suddenly I heard a large explosion. I had never been under hostile fire before, but I knew immediately that we were under attack. I dropped what I was doing, headed for my GQ station, which was below decks. I was a voice intercept section supervisor, Russian linguist. There were 5 Soviet Tu-95s, long-range bombers, which had all been reconfigured for intelligence collection, located at Alexandria, Egypt. The Soviets had told the world that they had given those aircraft to the United Arab Republic in particular Egypt. But that was not the case. Those aircraft were manned by Soviet crews, both ground crews and flight crews, wearing Egyptian uniforms. One of the primary missions of the intelligence group aboard the Liberty was to locate and intercept the traffic of those Soviet Tu-95 spy planes. um, we had a voice intercept section, and back in those days, the information that we collected, the voice traffic that we copied, was all on 5-inch magnetic tape reels. There were hundreds of them, and when you got that many, they're pretty heavy. We had hundreds and hundreds of pounds of code breaking manuals, linguistics manuals. Those all had to be destroyed, and we're at our GQ station, and the voice section supervisor, Chief Melvin Smith, said, "Well, I guess we better start emergency destruction." That's something you don't want to hear after years of copying intercept and breaking codes and putting it all together and making some useful intelligence out of it as to what your targets are doing. See that all destroyed. It's pretty heartbreaking. We had these large canvas ditching bags, lead weight in the bottom, brass ferrules in the side. The idea was to get those magnetic tapes, code manuals, linguistics manuals into those ditching bags, get them topside, pitch them over into the sea. By the time they could be recovered, any information in there would be useless. And we were under near constant fire. There were 826 large caliber ordnance strikes on the ship. 40 millimeter cannon fire, 30 millimeter cannon fire, rockets, heat seeking rockets. Every transmitting antenna that we had was riddled with rocket fire and cannon fire. We had no way of communicating with the outside world. Our distress frequencies are being jammed. That's a violation of international law. Whenever one of those shells would strike the ship, sound travels high rate of speed in water. The whole ship would ring every time one of those shells would strike it. It was deafening. It was like you're on the inside of a large steel barrel and someone was whacking it with a sledgehammer. We had got done loading those ditching bags with magnetic tapes and code manuals. And I was sitting at a plotting table and finishing up a cup of coffee when Lieutenant Bennett, the division officer, stuck his head in the door. The captain had just come on the 1MC and said, "Brace yourselves, torpedo attack, starboard side." Well, that's where we were. It was on that starboard side. And had a longtime friend of mine, Ronnie Campbell, that was there. And Ronnie said, "Well, they hit us with everything else. What else can they hit us with?" And he said, "You do what you want to." So I'm going to write a letter home. He sat down, stuck a piece of paper in his typewriter, and began typing out, "Dear Eileen, you won't believe what's happening to us."